Recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the next session in Launch Your Career in Canada, which is supporting career development of international students on behalf of the UBC Career Centre. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and for participating in this particular session, which will focus on the art of building connections. As you know, if you've participated in some of our other sessions, we do have a whole week of activities this week for Launch Your Career in Canada. The next session after today is Connect with Hiring Managers and Alumni. This is an in-person evening session. It is tomorrow, and I encourage you to attend if you are available to do so. Hopefully after this session, you will feel you have some good tips and tools to effectively connect with people in your own networks, including your peers, as well as people who are going to be at this next session to talk to you about opportunities, to talk to you about life after graduation, and to talk to you about their own experiences. So we are going to jump in here and talk about the art of building connections. And my name is Rebecca Dernfeld, and I am a career educator with the UBC Career Centre. But before we jump into our materials today, I would love for you to let me know in the chat where you are learning from. I want to acknowledge that the UBC Career Centre is on UBC Vancouver's Point Grey campus and is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge that you may be joining us today from many places with many different histories, and would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners and caretakers of those lands. And please feel free to have a moment of reflection and or to share in the chat where you are logging in from today. And the next thing I'd like to ask you to do is to take a moment to tell us why you're here. So please, if you can, scan the QR code on the screen, or feel free to go to the website that is listed here. And you just enter a passcode 1234, and then press enter on your keyboard and enter your UBC student number. This will also give us the ability to send the PDF of the slides to you after today's session. Just pause for a moment while you do that, and then we will get started. And we have also included the link to get to that webpage in the chat box. Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention once more is that we have the Launch Your Career in Canada, Ask Hiring Managers and Alumni how to get recruited, which is happening tomorrow. And it may be the reason why you are here today, to think about how to build connections, the art of building connections, how to make a great first impression on someone if you've never met them before. And also, if you have not yet had a chance to build or focus on your network here in Canada, to think about how you might have conversations and how you might build connections with folks who are living here, working here, and building out their own experiences here. So the first thing I'd like to start with is, what does it mean to build connections? Now, asking this question, I want to talk a little bit about something called relational versus transactional connection building. And I would think a lot of this information will be familiar to you, but if it is, this is a nice refresher or reminder about the ways in which we build connections. And it is always useful to keep in mind or reflect on how we are engaging with others, or how we have engaged with others, and how we are thinking about our next steps when we are going to improve those types of engagement. So relational versus transactional connection building. When we think about how these things differ from one another, transactional connection building focuses more on what you can get out of a relationship. So the idea here is that there is something you want or you need or you're hoping for, and that is not in of itself a bad thing. But if that is the focus, the key focus or the key goal of building a connection with another individual, then that can feel very transactional. And if the focus is on a desire to get what you want quickly with little investment in the relationship, then it also becomes very transactional. So, for example, we have a statement here. Hi, X. I'm currently studying at UBC and I would love to have an opportunity to work at your organization. Would love to see if you could find some time to chat. On the surface, this may not necessarily feel transactional because you're not necessarily asking for something directly. Although you are focusing on an opportunity, you're not saying, hi, here's my resume. Can you review it? I'm applying for this particular job. You're keeping it a little bit more open-ended when talking about an opportunity, potential opportunity. At the same time, this can feel transactional to someone you are engaging with. And so we want to be mindful of how you can build a connection through a relational experience. And that's really what we're going to focus on today. So defining relational connection building focuses on sharing what you have in common. So interests, field of study, professional associations, your role trajectory. It can also focus on admiration for the ways in which someone else's career or their personal life has developed that you admire. So what type of accomplishments have they engaged in that inspire you? What type of volunteer work are they participating in? And thinking about why this matters to you. So not just admiring them for what they've accomplished, but also why would that matter to you as an individual? That's part of that relational connection building. And then finally, recognizing that their thought leadership inspires you. So particular things that they have said, say in articles or posts, that they have been helpful to you or that you agree with. So again, the idea of relational connection building is to build a connection with someone by finding some common ground. So it includes you in that process. In transactional connection building, you are included in the process because you are hoping to gain or benefit from something from the other person. And so we really want to focus on building that common ground and that relational experience with another person. So how do we do that, right? It's one thing to say, great, I want a relational connection building experience. It's another thing to say, well, I don't know anything about this other person. They're a complete stranger to me. I'm not sure what I have to offer them. I'm not sure what they have to offer me. So how do we build that type of experience? So the first thing I want to speak to is aligning motivation, experiences, and skills. So here you'll see a Venn diagram on my screen. And what we have here are two overlapping circles, which is the diagram. On the left, we have the individual you are trying to connect with, their motivation, experiences, and skills. On the right, we have your motivation, experiences, and skills. And in the center, we have what we call the focus, which is where does the common ground situate itself? Now, we're going to talk a bit in the next few slides about where to source some of this information. So sourcing motivation of another individual, first of all, you would source your own, and we'll talk about that in a moment. That's easier to do because you are self-aware, you know who you are. But when we're thinking about someone else, we might source where their motivation comes from through hobbies and activities they share with us, or that they are sharing in, say, aspects of their professional brand, their values, what do they value, the type of learning they're engaging in currently or have engaged in to get to where they are right now. Their experiences. So how would you source experiences? Well, what are examples they share that excite them? Or what are examples they share that speak to their strengths? And then sourcing skills could be actions they've taken to engage in their experiences because of or through their motivation. Now, this information can be found in different places in addition to learning this directly from an individual. So we'll talk about that as well. But before we do that, I want you to take a moment to think about your own perspective. And this is a good place to start. So where are you right now? And if we were to unpack that a little bit further, consider what defines where you are now in your academic and your professional journey. So take a moment to think about what you have achieved, what you are currently working on, what you have finished, what you are developing, what you are sharing, and what you're participating in. Now, this could also be in the past. It doesn't have to be directly in the present, but these may be things you are engaging in now. These may be things that have already come to be, or it could be things that you are hoping to accomplish in the future. So you may be hoping to achieve something or work on something or finish something. So just think for a moment, where are you now? And if you have the opportunity to jot some notes down, you're welcome to do so. This isn't going to be an activity where you will share with a wider group, but I just want a moment for a bit of that self-reflection. So where are you now? So after completing that particular self-reflection opportunity, and of course, you can do this in your own time after today's session, you will receive the slide deck so you can refer back to it for some guidance. The next thing to think about is, what is your purpose for where you are right now? So it's one thing to be completing, to be achieving, to be seeking, but it's another to think about, what is the underlying purpose behind that? And purpose very much comes in alignment with self-motivation. So some guiding questions to think about what is your purpose for where you are right now is to think about, why did the thoughts come to mind that did come to mind when I asked that first question? So why did you think about what you've achieved? Why did you think about what you're working on? Is it because there's a purpose underlying, or multiple purposes underlying those particular things that you thought about? It's really important to unpack purpose, because purpose is a great way to understand where you are coming from. It's a great way to source purpose of others and to find a common ground to build a relational experience and connection with another person. So what is purposeful to you about the thoughts that came to mind? And what has been personally fulfilling about what came to mind for you? So again, you can think about what is purposeful and why also, why is that fulfilling? Now, if what comes to mind for you does not necessarily feel like it is guided by a sense of purpose, then that is something to think about. But most often we have reasons why we do what we do, why we are making the decisions we are making, and why we are striving for certain goals in our life. And so I'll leave that with you to have time later to reflect on, but give yourself some time to think about what you are doing right now, what you are hoping to achieve, what you have achieved, and where the purpose is in alignment with those factors of your present, past, and your future. So now what we want to do is align this with another professional's motivation, experience, and skills. So the idea here is to think about what is going on in your life, what is happening in the here and now, what are you hoping for the future, what have you already accomplished, where is that underlying purpose that has brought that to fruition, and then to think about how this can align with someone else. Now, one of the best ways, in my opinion, to do this alignment is to consider their motivation, their experiences, their skills, because that is going to help unpack for you where some of their purpose lies. Now, you can do this through different categories that I've listed here on the slide. This is not the end all be all, but it's a place to start, or a place to think about if you've already started to do these types of activities for yourself. So some ways to unpack another individual's motivation, experience, and skills can start with the steps they've taken for their own career development. It can focus on the strategies that they've been using to accomplish those steps. So that could be the education, So a step taken could be that they completed an undergrad degree or a master's degree or PhD, but the strategy is going to be different. The strategy may be, what did they focus on in those programs that they were enrolled in? What type of experiences did they engage in to leverage or to build out the opportunities that were given to them or that they found during that time that they were taking those steps? So that's being strategic about the experiences they were going through. You can also tune into the networks they've developed. They may share that they are part of certain research groups, that they have attended various conferences. They might mention a thesis or dissertation supervisor. They will talk about the employers that they are working for or have worked for. So these are their networks. Thought leadership. What are they sharing with the public to demonstrate that they are an expert in something or in multiple things? So what thought leadership speaks to them, and why are they sharing that with others? Professional brand. How are they positioning themselves as a professional, as an expert, as a thought leader? So thought leadership is what they are sharing in terms of their intelligence, in terms of their interests. Could be personal, could be professional. The professional brand is, how is that meant to shape who they are and how they want others to understand who they are in a professional, personal landscape. And then finally, another category you can focus on is next steps. So for example, there will be people who will share with you either through their online portfolios, in person, blogs, etc. We'll talk about all of that in a moment, but they will share what are they continuing or currently or going to be working on as next step. This can come across as further education. Maybe they're sharing they're completing certifications. Maybe they're in a graduate program. Maybe they've taken on a new role recently, which might have been different or maybe a further stepping stone in their career process or pathway. These are all indicators that they are thinking about their next steps. So identifying these pieces of an individual in these various buckets or categories can help you to unpack their motivation, their experiences, and the skills that they are developing. Now, one source of useful professional information, I don't think this is any surprise to anyone here, is LinkedIn. Absolutely a great tool to use if it's being used effectively by people you are looking at, that you are sourcing. A great tool to get information. So for example, we have here on the slide, an individual shared their LinkedIn profile publicly that is a individual who has developed some career experience, who is in a particular, was in a particular program, who has shared a bit about their brand, including how they represent themselves both visually and in the written form. And so for people like this individual who are very, very willing to share openly what they have accomplished, what they are developing in terms of their skills, where their motivation lies, this is a great way for you to source some very valuable information to help understand the alignment between you and that individual, their sense of purpose and your sense of purpose, as well as giving you an understanding of the holistic picture in terms of the kinds of ways they might want to connect. So thinking about how you can relate to one another because of what you're learning about these individuals, this or other individuals. Additional sources of useful professional information. You can look at blogs. So a number of professionals nowadays will share their thought leadership in blogs, whether it's connected to their company website, organization website, or externally separate. A lot of people do also contribute through LinkedIn, through the LinkedIn platform, but they may also do it externally and link through their LinkedIn to other blogs that they're contributing to, articles they're publishing. You can tune in to webinars where people are speaking about their area of expertise. So that can give you an understanding of their motivation, their skill set, and their experiences. You can also look at company websites, the organization websites, to see if they have a bio. Now, sometimes bios can be a little bit skeletal and they can be more professionally focused, but it can still give you a sense of what they're wanting to share with the public, how they are framing themselves, how they are branding themselves, and what is important to them or purposeful to them that they wish to share that in terms of their own professional journey. Now, the other thing you can do, and I encourage you to do, is to also think about how you wish to align with an industry's motivation, experiences, or skills. So this also plays into relational connection building, and we'll get to that in a moment. But beyond the individual themselves that you want to connect with, or you're hoping to connect with, or the community of people that you want to build connections with, you also want to think about where your own motivation, experiences, and skills, where they are aligning with your preferred industry or industries, plural. So thinking about the mission, the vision, the goals, and the values of an industry itself, as well as of employers, as well as of organizations, professional associations that reside or live within that particular industry. I would pay attention to company websites, reading through their mission statements, their core values, and any information they've shared about their history up to date to give you a sense of where they've come from, why they are in existence, and where they may be going. So some sources of useful industry information to give you that background, that context of where people are situated, why they're working in those environments, why they're choosing based on their purpose to be in those spaces. You can look at webinar series. So a lot of what's come out nowadays, and also that has been pre-recorded, has really emerged, in my opinion, because of what we experienced through COVID-19 and being remote for a number of years. A lot of information has been brought to online. So webinars, podcasts, if you're more of a listener instead of a viewer. This is, a lot of it is free, a lot of it is available, and a lot of it is really, really good material. So you can look at webinar series. You can read through industry reports. I'm not going to lie, those can be dry, but they can give you some great information about where things are headed, what's happening in industries, who are the key players. You can attend conferences. And you can also, and I heavily encourage you to, focus on alumni at your own institution. So here at UBC, we have Alumni UBC, and they share a lot of great opportunity for you to learn about what's happening in industries that alumni are going into, to learn from alumni themselves, to attend events in person and virtually. So all of these are ways that you can situate yourself in front of people to build conversations and also to do some prior research so that you can begin to think about what is relational between you and someone else. So now we want to move into building the connection. So we've talked a bit about how we can source information, how we can think about our own individual selves, how we can start to think about where alignment may be. And then we want to think about, okay, where, in what ways and where can we start building the connection? So I want to start off with something called the culture framework. So the culture framework is something I learned about from Jonathan Wilson. He's a professor and a branding expert, a speaker and consultant, and this was through LinkedIn Learning. And it was called Unlocking Authentic Communication in a Culturally Diverse Workplace: Why Authentic Communication Matters. And he talked about something called the culture framework. And he broke down the different letters in the word culture in order to give a sense of what this framework looks like when you are trying to build connection. So let's go through this for a moment. So the first thing is to celebrate what matters to others and the details they share about what matters. Now, you will be able to celebrate what matters to others because you've done that research that we just talked about. And when you are talking to them and asking further follow-up questions, they will share further detail. And that is a way that you can celebrate those details. Understanding where others are coming from as their journey is different than yours. So in a next slide, we will talk a little bit more about this, but really being mindful of not only bringing your own perspective into the conversation, but understanding where other perspectives are coming from. Listening to other stories and being present in the moment. So that active listening skill is very important, often in transactional connection building or conversation building. And I can be very guilty of this myself. And one thing, that we can do is to think about what we want to say next while still listening to how someone is responding to what we've already said. So if that has happened to you in your life, I don't doubt that's probably happened to everyone at least some point in their life. That is something to be mindful of. That is something I have had to actively work on. Instead of thinking about my next statement or how I want to build on a conversational piece that someone is sharing, I have to be very mindful of listening actively to their story, to understand where they're coming from, and to take a moment, if it is the right context, to celebrate what they've shared, as opposed to just jumping in and building on the next piece. It's important, of course, to follow up and to keep a conversation going, but it's also important to be mindful of this process. Trust is built by uniting on common topics. So finding that common ground where you can build some trust with another person because you share commonalities. Unlocking the unstated needs and desires of people you're talking to once you've built that rapport. So this is very interesting to me. Being able to read between the lines. There may be needs or desires of someone else while you are listening to what they have to share with you. If you can unlock that, if you can tap into that, that can also build trust. It's also an opportunity to continue that relational connection building. Resist the temptation to judge too quickly and jump to conclusions. This is fairly straightforward, but it happens to the best of us. You may be in a conversation with someone, they say something that maybe doesn't resonate with you, or maybe you've thought of whatever they've said in a different way, and it may lead to some initial judgment or jumping to a conclusion. So try to hold back on that. And then the final piece is energize. Energize and empathize with others to create a space for communicating and sharing. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to bring boatloads of energy into a conversation. And one thing I would be mindful of when you're engaging in relational conversation building is to be where the other person is at. So it's important, that you are feeling comfortable and enjoying the engagement, of course, but also being mindful of maybe the energy level of the other individual, being mindful of how much time they have, being mindful of whether there's distractions within the space that you are communicating with them in. So you can empathize around that and also be able to energize and focus on a connection of energy between you and another person when you are engaging in what is called the culture framework. So let's move into this in a little bit more detail. So when we think about stepping into the conversation, I have a few quotes here that I want to build out and talk through. And this is from The Art of Building High Quality Connections, a publication on February 21st, 2023. And the first quote is, "To build truly high quality connections, we must set a benevolent intention toward the other person that prioritizes a sense of togetherness in the moment." So what does this mean? To build high quality connections, the first moments of a conversation do matter. So while we often say small talk is not necessarily the best way to build out a relational connection, and in defining small talk, we mean surface level exchanges. Small talk can be, oh, have you enjoyed the weather today in Vancouver? We're finally getting some sunshine. And the person may respond, yes, I'm so excited. The weekend's coming and I actually get to be outside and enjoy the sunshine. Well, yeah, that is small talk, right? And sometimes we don't take it any further from there. But in fact, research shows us that small talk can actually lead to an initial impression of trustworthiness. So it's important to keep in mind that small talk may be the way you start a conversation. It usually is. You don't necessarily have to jump into the research you've done about someone else if you've had the chance to do that research, and get into all the finer details of what you want to discuss or what you're hoping to discuss, because that can feel very transactional. You may want to start off with something that is more surface level. Also, thinking about starting off with personal rather than professional subjects. This can be best to begin with because it's a way to warm yourself and someone else into a conversation. So often what I find and what I've seen or I've heard other people find and feel when they are in a professional environment and they're networking or they're trying to build conversation and connection, they feel that the professional is where they should focus. And that is fair because these particular environments are designed for professionals to come together, because you may not necessarily meet these particular kinds of people outside of those environments unless you source them yourselves, you invite them to a coffee chat, or you have a way to connect with them through your own network. But we also want to be mindful that we're all human. We all are bringing into a space that is even a professional space our whole selves. And that could include things that are happening in our lives that are not going well. That could include successes that we want to celebrate. It could include personal experiences that are leaving us feeling drained or feeling energized. So it is not to say that you need to know what the personal is going on or what personal experience someone is going through when you are building an initial connection. But you can begin with something that focuses on the personal to help warm up the conversation. So that could be asking a question, for example, whether they are having the opportunity to engage in an activity that they enjoy. So, for example, if you are able to do some prior research, learn a little bit about these individuals, or maybe they've shared something through a webinar you've watched, or you've listened to them on a panel at a professional networking event, and maybe they've shared something that is personal, like activities or hobbies, or they have children, something like that, you can bring that into the conversation. So you could ask something like, I heard that you have little kids at home. You mentioned, when you were talking about work-life balance, may I ask, how old are they, or what years are they going through in school right now? If they're an animal lover, as I am, I always mention that, you can ask them about what kind of animal they have. Ask them about what kinds of activities they like to do, where they like to walk their dog, for example. So you can bring that personal. It is part of that surface level exchange, but it can be a way to warm up the conversation. And the next step is to find some common ground. So you can ask questions that uncover your shared underlying values to them. So if you have been able to do some of that prior research, you may have already identified some common ground, and you can ask some questions around that. And I will share in my next slide some openers or ways to do that. The next thing I want to tap into is the second quote here. While sympathy can create the illusion of high quality connection, in reality, it can drive disconnection through the othering of a person. So what we mean here is sympathy is a tendency to imagine that others' thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs are overly familiar to our own. So we really want to be mindful that we don't always share the same thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs. And instead, we can focus on empathy. Empathy refers to truly seeing and sharing in a person's emotional experience. So instead of hearing what someone has to say, if they share something about their own personal or professional experience, and trying to connect to that in terms of the same experience or similar experience that you have had, which may be the case, trying to think about it from their perspective. So can you see it and understand it from their own experience? Now, this is not always easy to do. There's also a time and a place for this, but it is important because we don't necessarily want to build a connection or try to build a connection that comes across as transactional because we say something such as, oh, yes, yes, I went through the exact same experience. I did A, B, and C, just like you've described, and I've come out of that experience feeling a very similar way to you. It may be more beneficial to reflect back to that person what you're hearing. And you can indicate that there is common ground, but also being mindful that their experience is not going to be exactly the same as yours. And the final piece here is a third quote. Mindful listening allows us to focus on being present and engaged with the other person. To listen well, we must focus on uncovering what the speaker ultimately needs from us. And I really like that piece here at the end, what they need from us. So going into building a connection, building a conversation, especially when you're focusing on this, perhaps from a professional perspective, the ultimate goal may be to get something from them. And that, again, is very transactional. Relational connection building is to be mindful that that individual may also want or need something from us. So tune into the information conveyed through their words, their body language, and their tone. This is also a great way to assess where the conversation may be going and to get a sense of whether the person is ready to build a connection. They may not be in that headspace, and that is okay. Paraphrasing is really, really, really useful. Paraphrase what we hear and seek clarification so that they are sharing information with us. Listen, actively listen, as I mentioned before. Try not to necessarily think of what your next statement will be, but really listen to what they have to say and seek clarification if needed. Paraphrase back to them what you've heard. Validate and support in what they convey to you. So that's also a wonderful way to build a relational experience in a conversation. Be present instead of thinking about your follow-up. And I did mention that a couple of times. So that one's an important one for me and a skill that I've had to develop over time. Okay, so here's some conversation guiders. And I think this is fairly straightforward, but I'll walk through some of these categories. You can use a curiosity, especially if you had the chance to do some of that prior research about the industry that person is in, about their own past experiences, what they're sharing about themselves, the steps they've taken, etc. You can guide with a curiosity. So I am curious about whatever that is. An anecdote. So if you've had a similar experience to that person, of course, leading from the framework of empathy and that culture framework that we talked about a moment ago, you can share a similar experience. Open-ended questions are fantastic. So the who, what's, when, where's, and why's, as opposed to closed-ended questions where the conversation may come to an abrupt end if you're asking closed-ended questions such as do you or have you, that leads to a yes or no answer. So open-ended questions. What do you think about something? And finally, a compliment. So showing your admiration for another individual is a very nice way to build the art of conversation, the art of connection building. Also, you can start with a compliment or share a compliment and follow up with a curiosity or an anecdote or an open-ended question. So these are all ways that you can get that conversation going. Now, I found an article here in the University of British Columbia magazine. It's around networking do's and don'ts. I thought it'd be useful just to share this here, pull out from what that article shared. And again, I think this is all very straightforward information, but important to keep in mind. And, you know, I focus on networking, not that it is the sole purpose of the art of building a connection, but the fact that you have the opportunity to build out your network tomorrow, the fact that building experiences here and meeting people here in Canada is part of building your network in your social network, your personal network, your professional network. And so these are just some tips around the do's and don'ts. So let's walk through these. The do's of networking: talk about your strengths so others can get to know you. Of course, going through that self-reflection process, identifying your own strengths, your sense of purpose that lead to those strengths, or your strengths that lead to your sense of purpose. Keep the connection going so people know you best. What that means is continue the connection, continuing the conversation. Be curious and seek to learn from others, and initiate opportunities to bring people together. This is one of my favorite ones, actually. If you are an individual who likes to bring people together because you see some sort of like-mindedness, you see that alignment between motivation, skills, and experience, then you can be the initiator of bringing people together, which is a great way to build your network and build other people's networks. The don'ts: don't ask for favors from strangers. Don't have fixed outcomes in mind. Don't ask yes or no questions in a conversation. And don't forget about your network contacts after your first engagement. And we will talk about that in a moment. So if people feel relaxed around you and you make them feel good about themselves, then they're likely to share so much more unprompted, which can also make your life easier. Okay, so putting it all together. Now, this is a very structured slide in terms of putting things together from what we've talked about. There's no need for you to have to take this approach, but for those of you that do like to stay organized, or if you're someone like me that can't remember usually one day from the next, then it is helpful to keep track of what you're learning and how you're building your alignments. You can do this more visually in a Venn diagram, or in a table, or whatever format you wish. So here we can see a column on your purpose. So working through that reflection piece, thinking about your motivation, your experiences, your skills. If you are focusing on a particular individual, their purpose, their motivation, experiences, and skills. The industry purpose, so where they are situated, where you are interested in moving into. Of course, this is focusing on that professional network building, motivation, experiences, and skills of the industry. Common ground. So what is relational? Here, this is where you're going to, use the Venn diagram, or just through reviewing what you've written in those first 3 columns, thinking where do the connections lie? Where's that common ground? Then you might want to think about some conversation guides. So thinking about, if you do end up connecting with that individual, what might a curiosity be, or an anecdote, or a question you could ask, or a compliment you could share? That can help you feel prepared for when you are starting to build the connection with that person. And finally, I would recommend, if you do get the chance to build that connection, take notes after. Jot down what additional information you've received from them, where you see further alignment or connections. One of the greatest things I've experienced through relational connection building is often what comes out of that experience is another opportunity to move forward with the connection. So for example, from my own experience, I was giving a presentation one day for a group of students here at UBC, and there was a faculty member in the room. And the faculty member happened to ask me what I was interested while pursuing my graduate studies right now. And I shared a little bit about my project, and they indicated and stated that they had an interest in a similar vein for the students they work with. And so I said, well, you know what, it'd be great to connect and chat about this area that we're both interested further. We might be going in completely different directions with that. We are working in completely different environments in terms of the units or the type of work we do. This is faculty, I'm staff, but there is that common ground. So as soon as I walked away from that conversation, I started to take mental notes. This is a great way to do follow-up. So how are you going to keep the connection going? So one way to think about this is group your connections based on common ground. This is also a nice way to bring people together to continue that art of building a connection with each other, for you to be the instigator who does that for others. That also puts you in a great place. The other thing is to provide an update to your connections, or your contacts, your connections, of what you've done to build your skill set, especially if it was recommended by them. So through that art of conversation building and connection, you will hopefully receive something that is useful for you to continue your own journey, your own purpose-driven journey, to add to your motivation, your skill set, your experiences. And if that is something you activate on, then you are very welcome to share that with that individual who gave you that insight or that direction or that recommendation. You can also share news or information, and you can tag your connections or message them directly about that. You can offer to help. You can offer to make a connection for them. If you, and as you are expanding your own network, you may find that someone you've connected with would be a great connection for another individual. And you can engage in an activity with them. So social or professional. So for example, if you connect with someone, you are having that relational experience, and you both realize that you love a certain type of activity, it could be professional or social. If that activity comes into play for you, it's coming into your calendar, or you've sourced something that is interesting, you could absolutely invite that individual to join you for that activity. I think this is especially great if it's other networking events, if it's a conference, a webinar that they might be interested in. It's a great way to share resources and to keep a connection going. So I will end here. I have a quote here: strong relationships are based on trust and communication. But if there's no communication, there can be no trust. So keep in mind that communication focuses on that relational building, that relational connection. And I hope that what has been shared today will be of use for you for when you are continuing your journey to connect with others. And please take a moment to tell us how we did. So you are going to be entered into a $25 gift card draw if you do fill out the short, very short form where we ask you a couple of questions about how we did today, and we would love to receive your feedback. And thank you so much for joining us today.